Well, with much ado being made about cyberpunk edgerunners, I figured it was probably worth taking a stab at a similar anime, one that was made at what would actually have been the height of the cyberpunk genre. And additionally, it's going back and taking a crack at a show that I reviewed over a decade ago. Now, I'll admit that I wasn't exactly kind to Bubblegum Crisis when I first did that video, but I like to think that I've changed as a person since then and might have a lighter touch on it now. And especially since there's some dickless weirdo who keeps bringing it up every time he wants to razz me on Twitter, maybe this will shut his little rat face for a minute. But it's important to think about the world in which the show was created in the first place. In 1986, Japan was in what we would call a bubble economy, best understood as a rapidly expanding and extremely fragile state to be in. Now, I'm not an economist, so I can't adequately explain what precisely went down on the monetary end, but land prices were through the roof, and people were taking out loans and doing business on speculation of land prices that they expected to continue to increase. If I had to explain it in modern terms, imagine if an entire country's economy was working off of cryptocurrency. It's only worth anything if you can get somebody else to buy it. Anyway, the bubble popped in 1991, and a lot of people were stuck with loans which could never properly get paid down and were a millstone around the neck of every business in the country. Kind of like student loans in America. And Japan's economy never really recovered, leading to what they originally called the Lost Decade, then the Lost 20, and now the Lost 30 after that. Yeah, without government intervention in an economic crisis, it turns out that rich people will just fuck your country into the dirt. Who knew? So what does this mean for Bubblegum Crisis? Well, in the 80s when it was first made, it was also a time when people had money to burn on OVAs. Original video animation was extremely popular because everybody had a VCR and they would flood into rental shops for any old damn thing to watch. And because companies had money to burn, they'd throw them at any studio that said, hey, I can make something, sure. So by 1987, most OVA series were original works entirely, which includes Bubblegum Crisis. So what have we got here? Well, Bubblegum Crisis, BGC, is very much a product of its time, in which extreme wealth disparity, driven by a super mega corporation, is taking over most of Mega Tokyo. This is pretty understandable because Katsuhiro Akiyama, the primary director, grew up in the wake of the occupation of Japan, and could see the telltale signs of a fall on the way. The Genom Corporation built up this new Mega Tokyo with the help of robotic workers called boomers. Insert joke here. The boomers have this problem where they go full Terminator for reasons yet to be completely understood over the opening acts of the series. We never actually see them do much physical labor in this, which is kind of comical, but makes sense, I guess, in context. So, to combat these crimes, you get Special Vehicles Section Unit 2. Wait, no, that's Pat Labor. Enter the AD Police, who, for all their tech and frankly irresponsible use of artillery, can't do shit against these robots. Get 'em, they build 'em to last. So the cops are utterly useless, as is the way they usually are in most of these stories, and rather than issuing a full recall of clearly defective units, we have to rely on the Night Sabers, a squad of 4 women in power armor who are here to clean up the mess. So there's the basic premise for you. It's not exactly deep, but it's enough to work with, or at least try to. Our 4 main characters are Pris, Nene, Lena, and Sylvia, with a few supporting characters. Primary focus is given to Pris, short for Priscilla Asagiri, who leads a band called the Replicants. Yes, she's based on Daryl Hannah from Blade Runner, What Gave It Away. She dons a blonde wig and red leather to do her band thing, and sings most of the background music through the first 6 episodes or so, because that was as far as the contract for the voice actress would allow. When we work together, it's much better. Nene is a mole who works in the AD Police. Lena is extant. And Sylvia is the responsible party for making these Night Saber suits, which are above and beyond anything that Genom can produce. Now, Genom blew up her daddy when she was a kid, and she's got a bit of a grudge, as one does. Since her dad was working on the original boomers at the time, he took the time to make some anti-boomer weaponry because he had a feeling that they'd just, go nuts. And let's be realistic, do you really need to make something that looks like that for construction? Boomers, as you would expect, come in all shapes and sizes, much like replicants, to absolutely nobody's surprise. So, case file number 1 is kind of all over the place, but it's also like 45 minutes long, so it's not surprising that it's doing a lot of heavy lifting here. The Night Sabers get hired to find a missing girl who got kidnapped by a group of boomers, who in this case, rather than simply being rogue machines, are more accurately some sort of weird bio-droid thing? Hell, they could be part plant for all I fucking know. Intentionally, they're pretty vague on details because that's a smart idea if you want a series to have any sort of timelessness. I mean, how many 80s and 90s sci-fi novels talk about a gig of memory as if it's some sort of ungodly amount, right? At any rate, Leon, an AD police officer with the hots for Pris, ends up making the save for them while the boomers mutate into literally an island-sized monster. And of course, Cynthia ended up being a boomer too, one of the Epstein models apparently, and before she could get absorbed into the mechanical mass, they hit her with an orbital laser. Wouldn't mind seeing that happening to more lowly characters, thank you. So the first episode comes and goes, builds up a world and an atmosphere. Cool, good. The animation is basically unimpeachable. The music is pretty 80s, and if you're into that stuff, great, and if you're not, sorry, but it's to be expected. The story is really flimsy, though, and the amount of repeated shots in this is a little off-putting to me, since I know there was a lot of money being put into this. But shaving off a few seconds from a 45-minute episode isn't all that important in the grand scheme of things. Kind of embodying the excess of the time it was made in, too. And I will say the animation team is just flexing super hard on these action scenes. Episode 2 follows straight on from the first, trying to clean up loose ends from a laser going off in a major metropolitan area. Who knew? Cynthia was basically a walking targeting computer for these orbiting weapons, which is fucked up in that special way that only 80s sci-fi can really get a grip on. But tying up loose ends narratively also means nuking a site from orbit again. After we get to watch Lena strike up a friendship with Irene, whose fiancé was killed by Genom. Guys, you gotta do something about this turnover rate. And it's not exactly a great follow-up to a fairly good episode. It's 15 minutes shorter for starters, and you can really tell that they had ideas in the wings, but had to get through this particular chunk before they felt like they were allowed to go further into it. But more on that later. The third episode really ramps up the violence, by the way, with people getting blown just to ribbons. This one's appropriately entitled Blow Up, and deals with Genom forcing poor people out of their homes for the sake of economic development. But one of those families is one that Pris is close with, and so now it is time, again, to fight. A lot of this is set up for a very long action piece, which is, again, well shot, it showcases great animation, but it's a lot of work in service to a B-plot that had already been building up, where Brian Mason, the primary Genom exec, takes on the Night Sabers head-to-head. I feel like this battle is kind of unearned, and it's not really a particularly exciting conclusion to the first arc of the series. The last 2 episodes ended up only being 30 minutes long, where the first one is 45, so it feels lopsided, and kind of like they blew their load early and had to figure out how to keep the momentum going. But again, there's no guarantee that more episodes would have been made, so that's kind of the way the cookie crumbles. This feels like they had a decent enough story for a B-movie in this time period, but didn't really have much else to go on, and then it turned out this got popular enough to merit more being made, and they just had no godly idea what to do.
Slightly literal interpretation.
So with this well in mind, the next episode is called Revenge Racer, and it features that. There's a gang called the Outriders that like to cause havoc on the highway specifically, and they put this dude and his girlfriend in the hospital. So as revenge, once he gets out, he turns his car into a missile and goes around bashing heads. And while he's racing around, he injures Pris. Good God, it's lucky you're not Street Pizza, Toots. You lost your bike at Mach fucking 3. This keys her into the entire situation, but she's just a little late to stop his last joyride, in which he also brought his traumatized girlfriend along.
Oh yeah, let's strap her into a 2,000 kilometer an hour death machine. Great job, you idiot.
Celia, at this point, feels extremely disengaged with the rest of her crew, and it's a wonder that she even bothers to suit up and help out. Lena is extremely cute, but she's basically there to push the plot along when Pris is either being dozy or being injured. At least Nene feels a little bit more useful as a mole here, but ultimately this definitely is Pris's show. I would have liked to see this whole shebang actually be a little bit more interesting writing-wise. Like, the girlfriend could be hallucinating her boyfriend still being alive and doing all the car stuff herself, or maybe it's all a projection of the car, like Ghost in the Machine sort of thing, that the car is trying to get revenge, even though it's possessed by their spirits or whatever, or even that it looks like it's him the entire time, but it turns out it's her all dressed up. It's, that old twist, any of those old twists. The way it came out is fine, adequate even, but there could have been a lot more interesting things going on. And well, yes, those are kind of some basic, bare bones twists. Some twist is better than no twist. If you take the first 3 episodes together, it makes a really disjointed movie where there's not really any resolution to character arcs. And this episode really cements the feeling of, sure, I guess, that rolls off of it. Episode 5 starts off with a great action sequence that's very well done animation-wise, again, but the whole thing is so cornball and cliche that I actually wondered if it was somebody watching a movie in the universe. But no, these girls are trying to escape Space Station Genados, and if you were thinking they were probably boomers, well, yeah, that's entirely correct. But the spaceship they steal crashes on Earth, and now we've got rogue boomers running around. I mean, more rogue boomers running around, but now they're from space. Oh, I hate to call this story eye-roll worthy, but it really does feel like the kind of thing written by a 13-year-old edgelord. So walk with me on this one. Sylvie, one of the androids that escaped, is actually a sex droid that feeds on human blood. Her partner, Henri, was wounded in the escape, and now she has to be pumped full of blood so she won't die, and gets it transfused into her like a vampire. Through all of this, Sylvie befriends Pris as a fellow motorcycle jockey, which leads to them having a conflict, because of course it does. And on top of all that, Sylvie also pilots DD, a mecha with a neutron bomb that will detonate if it runs out of power. Fuck me running. The 80s were just wilding out, weren't they? So next thing we know, DD assimilates Sylvie after her last heist goes south, and the Nightsabers have to take her down. This comes on the heel of the only character development Lena's gotten to date, where she apparently bounces from boyfriend to boyfriend like most people change their socks. It also introduces us to a new bad guy, since we killed the last one off a little too early, whose name is Largo. No, different Largo. No Disco Volante for us. I feel conflicted in this episode, too, because they could have easily set up Sylvie to be someone on Pris's level, someone that she could have been teased as the next member of the Nightsabers, only to suddenly show that, oh, she's been a boomer the whole time. This would kind of be in the service of nailing down how the line between artificial and human is getting incredibly blurry. They could make it a surprise that she was on the ship when they could have just made it look like the mech was the only thing that came out of it, that sort of thing. There's so much work put into the visuals here that the story is so obvious and linear, it's goddamn insulting. Even if you've watched dozens of anime, movies, TV series, and all that, this kind of A to B storytelling is like having a lineage recited back to you. No surprises, no flourishes, nothing to make it stand out. Fucking snooze. Episode 6 boils down to Pris gets by with a little help from her friends. After the whole Sylvie incident, she wants out because between what we actually saw in episode 5 and now, there was several episodes worth of characterization that happened. Anyway, Largo reveals what he's got going on, which would be really impressive if he had any build-up at all and didn't talk like... Well, fuck. I was gonna say he sounded like a villain from a badly written anime, but he's precisely that. The writing was already kind of shaky, but this has gone full Sour Patch Kids. It plays like they just improv'd up scene after scene and said, yep, good enough, no notes, animate it. Behold, my ultimate power to blow things up with satellite lasers. Oh, you thought you had me, but it was just a body double. Ha ha, fuck you! These episodes are reaching up to the 40-minute territory again. You can spring for some better storytelling. Never minding the fact that they just left a whole plotline idea about fake Nightsabers hanging loose, who just turn into their monster boomer forms almost immediately. You could have milked that one for some cool action, but you just squandered that idea too. And I'll bet pickles to pesos that Sylvia is supposed to be a boomer. So it's important to note that at the time of production, they were intending to kill off Pris because there was contract disputes and some other dumb crap because Japan's entertainment industry is run by dinosaurs. But because fans were like, no, we really like Pris because she's literally the only thing we have to hold on to in this show, they decided to keep her around. 2 episodes left. We come to Double Vision. This one starts off with an interminable music video, and then goes to a bunch of corpos getting killed by this pretty awesome looking spider robot.
From downtown!
And while this mech is different from anything we've seen lately, it also has the funniest little escape animation. Oh, what's the little guy go? Oh! I'm not entirely convinced that that wasn't an actual spider that they shoot away from the animation desk. So this next character is pop idol Vision, who looks like she's got moose and squirrel in her hair as she lands in Tokyo. Also, absolutely no mention of the fact that, like, 12 Genom Corp locations were nuked from the sky last episode, just in case you were curious. Finally, at this point in the series, they are desperately trying to play catch up with Lena, who has to this point been the other Nightsaber in the crew. Especially compared to how she was in Tokyo 2040, this is downright painful. Anyway, Vision is also Reika Chang, the younger sister of Irene Chang, who was killed in episode 2. Just gonna throw it out there, maybe if you stop fucking killing people, Giant Megacorps, you'd get less people wanting revenge. I know, I ask a lot. I'm sorry. I feel bad for Leon and Daly in this show, because they're so utterly useless, and they spend most of their jobs getting smacked around, shot down for dates, or being told to stop doing their job altogether. It's like they're intruding on the series from a different anime altogether. At least in this one, we get to see the Nightsabers doing something more than just appearing out of nowhere and punching robots. Honestly, this one is one of the more interesting ones that had me actually engaged outside of the first one, if for no other reason than they just did something different. Has a sense of progression and danger that feels like storytelling, rather than just a string of events. This episode is where the promise of the series really comes to the forefront. The promise of a group of disparate women coming together to fight a faceless corporate machine. I mean, it still ends with a big explosion, but, what can you do? The last episode is the longest of all of them, and something's gone very wobbly here. The animation is still pretty enough, but it's like a different kind of pretty. It feels a lot more anime than the last one, specifically, well, it feels like something that was made in the early 90s because it was, incidentally. It's a real marked change in color palette and color tone, which isn't entirely unwelcome, but watching these one after another is a bit wild. Anyway, this final episode, which became the last one because of a half dozen reasons, has a lot more life to it than the ones in the middle of the series. The animation is more energetic and fluid, there's lots more warm colors over the shop. This extends to the character interactions, which, after about 6 hours of animation, finally feel like it's about characters that care about each other. This is more the pity, because seeing what this has in store actually makes me wonder what the show could have been if it had been made in the early 90s with more experience under the animation team's collective belts. Oh, and you can definitely feel Sonoda's influence on this one with all the gun porn going on here. Gunsmith Cats wouldn't be out for a while, but you can see where Rally and her friends all came from. The story is about an aspiring journalist trying to get the scoop on the Nightsabers, while also being about a new form of boomer being used to besiege the AD police, and you can probably imagine how well that goes on both fronts, eh? And this brings us to the end of the series. It was originally intended to be 13 episodes, but between a dispute between Artmec and Yomex, the two companies responsible for creating it, and the bottom falling out of the entire Japanese economy, the series was in fact cut short. There are probably a million other reasons that could be dug up or extrapolated, but those are the two primary reasons. I think the first episode and the last two are probably what people remember most about the series when they look fondly back on it, or maybe it's the first 3 taken as a whole. Those are the ones which have the most storytelling, or at least the most interconnection in the ways that matter. While the animation is always good, it's absolutely beyond critique for when it was made and what it was done with. The music is chock full of bangers. The storytelling, however, is bland where it should be gripping, and character progression is weak until the end comes calling and then they scramble to try and make it up. Now, I'm probably in the minority here, but I think the reboot series, Bubblegum Crisis Tokyo 2040, was a much better realization of what the series was supposed to end up being. It has a more stable production, which helps, but it also has better characterization and a more focused storyline to make an overall better experience. The original has definite problems of throwing things at a wall to see what sticks, outside of the production issues that ended up plaguing it behind the scenes. By comparison, it only stands to reason that a TV series made over a decade later would have more to offer a modern viewer. Speaking of things made over a decade later, the first time I took a crack at this series was way back in 2009, and given my inability to listen to my own work without wanting to fuck my own ears with a particularly large cactus, this is probably going to be my standing statement on the series as a whole for the foreseeable future. If there's anything that you should take away from the original Bubblegum Crisis, is that you should definitely get rid of every single mega corporation before they start making robots that go haywire and kill us all. At any rate, this has been Professor Otaku, and this show kills fascists.